Shepard, your host on behalf of author Daniel P. Douglas. In this series, we reveal real Cold War secrets and excavate the classified details your government hoped you'd never discover. And here we go. Starfish Prime. When America nuked space and broke Hawaii. The night we detonated a hydrogen bomb 250 miles up and treated it like a fireworks show. It was July 9th, 1962, and hotels in Honolulu were throwing parties. Not birthday parties, not anniversary parties, nuclear bomb parties. At 11:09 p.m. Hawaii time, America detonated a 1.4 megaton hydrogen bomb in space. The explosion happened 250 miles above Johnston Atoll, about 900 miles southwest of the Hawaiian Islands. People came to watch. They brought their kids. This was Starfish Prime, the largest nuclear test ever conducted in outer space, and nobody in Hawaii understood what they were really about to witness. The show everyone wanted to see. The test wasn't secret. The military announced it publicly. The countdown broadcast over shortwave radio so people could time their viewing. Hotels advertised rainbow bomb parties on their rooftops. Photographers debated camera settings for capturing a thermonuclear explosion in space. This was Cold War America in 1962. Nuclear tests were entertainment. The military wanted the Soviets to know what we could do. The public wanted to see it happen. One man's father played cornet in a dance band at a Waikiki beachfront hotel that night. When the sky exploded in brilliant colors, the band and waiters ran outside to watch. The tourists started shouting. They wanted to know why the music stopped. They wanted their drinks. That's how casual it was. A hydrogen bomb detonated in space, and tourists complained about slow service. Starfish Prime was part of Operation Fishbowl. The program included 5 high-altitude nuclear tests. The military wanted data on electromagnetic pulses. They wanted to know what nuclear explosions would do to enemy missiles in space. They wanted to see if they could manipulate the Van Allen radiation belts for defense purposes. The weapon was a W-49 thermonuclear warhead. It rode on a Thor rocket launched from Johnston Atoll. The target altitude was 250 miles up, well into space. The yield was 1.4 megatons. That's 100 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. Scientists thought the effects on Hawaii would be minimal, too far away. Just a pretty light show on the horizon. They were catastrophically wrong. The disaster before the show. June 20th, 1962 was supposed to be the night. The first Starfish test was ready to launch. The Thor rocket lifted off from Johnston Atoll and everything looked normal for 59 seconds. Then the engine quit and the missile broke apart in midair. They had to destroy it by remote. The nuclear warhead broke into pieces, raining radioactive debris down on Johnston Atoll. Plutonium contaminated the launch pad. They spent days cleaning up and rebuilt the pad. Another attempt was scheduled, and they called it Starfish Prime. That's how naming worked in Operation Fishbowl. If a test failed, the next attempt got the word prime added. If that failed, it would be double prime. They kept going until something worked or they ran out of names. The night space caught fire. July 9th, 1962, 11 p.m. Hawaii time. 900 hours coordinated universal time. The Thor rocket launched successfully this time, and it climbed for 13 minutes and 41 seconds. At exactly 250 miles altitude, the warhead detonated. The explosion was visible from Hawaii to New Zealand. The initial flash burned through clouds which changed rapidly from brilliant white to an expanding green ball. Great white fingers extended from the surface, rising 40 degrees above the horizon in sweeping arcs. The fingers turned downward toward the poles and disappeared in seconds, replaced by spectacular rings moving outward at incredible speed. The aurora effects lasted for minutes, and the sky turned blood red and pink. It looked like sunrise at midnight with the end of the world rendered in Technicolor. In Hawaii, people on rooftops cheered. They thought they were watching a harmless demonstration 900 miles away. They were wrong about the harmless part. The electromagnetic pulse hit right away. About 300 streetlights across Oahu went dark all at once. A new microwave link the phone company had recently installed to improve communication between islands failed completely. Telephone calls from Kauai to the other Hawaiian islands stopped working. Radio stations blacked out. Burglar alarms started going off across Honolulu, and garage doors opened and closed randomly. An emergency siren activated for no reason. The electrical surge affected circuits, power lines, and anything connected to the grid. Scientists had predicted an electromagnetic pulse. They just thought it would be small. The Starfish Prime EMP was so powerful, it drove most of their measuring equipment off scale. They couldn't get accurate readings because the pulse exceeded what their instruments could measure. Hawaii's electrical infrastructure in 1962 was relatively simple and rugged compared to today. That's why the damage was repairable. But modern electronics are far more sensitive. A Starfish Prime blast today would cause exponentially worse problems. The satellites that died. Starfish Prime created an artificial radiation belt around Earth. The explosion ejected huge amounts of high-energy electrons upward. These particles got trapped in Earth's magnetic field. The belt was stronger than the natural Van Allen belts, and it lasted for over 10 years. In 1962, there were 24 satellites in orbit. Starfish Prime damaged or destroyed at least 8 of them. Some died immediately. Others failed gradually as the radiation fried their circuits. Telstar 1 was one of the casualties. It was the first satellite to broadcast live television signals and relay telephone calls through space. It launched on July 10, 1962, one day after Starfish Prime. The artificial radiation belt damaged its electronics, and within months, it stopped working. Britain's first satellite, Ariel 1, also died. Multiple other satellites failed over the following months. The military had created an orbiting death zone for electronics. Scientists were shocked by how bad it was, how long it lasted, and how much damage it caused. They hadn't predicted any of it accurately. The tests they couldn't complete. The military had planned more tests after Starfish Prime. One was called Eureka. It would have used a 1 megaton warhead at an altitude above 600 miles. They cancelled it. The damage from Starfish Prime was too severe, and the artificial radiation belt was killing satellites. Another high-altitude blast might make orbital space unusable for decades. Operation Fishbowl continued with lower-altitude tests. Bluegill, Checkmate, Kingfish, and Tightrope all detonated at altitudes measured in tens of miles instead of hundreds. The yields were smaller. The damage was more contained. But none came close to Starfish Prime's power. That record still stands today. The largest nuclear explosion ever conducted in outer space. The Soviets who watched. An uninvited Soviet scientific ship was stationed near Johnston Atoll on July 9, 1962. Another Soviet ship positioned itself in the southern conjugate region near the Samoan Islands. The conjugate region is the point on the opposite side of the equator where Earth's magnetic field lines connect. The Soviets knew that effects from the blast would appear there too. They came to collect data. After the detonation, bright auroras appeared in both locations. The artificial aurora stretched from the detonation point all the way to the southern conjugate region, following the magnetic field lines. The Soviets got to watch American nuclear effects from multiple angles. They were conducting their own high-altitude tests at the same time. The space arms race wasn't just about who could reach orbit first. It was about who could weaponize it better. The treaty that ended the madness. October 1962 brought the Cuban Missile Crisis. For 13 days, America and the Soviet Union stood at the edge of nuclear war. President Kennedy and Premier Khrushchev stared at each other across the abyss. It is insane that two men, sitting on opposite sides of the world, should be able to decide to bring an end to civilization, Kennedy said at a White House meeting. Both nations continued nuclear testing after Cuba, but something had changed. They'd seen how close they came to destroying everything. The atmosphere tests, the space tests, the ever bigger bombs, all of it suddenly looked like collective insanity instead of strength. On July 25, 1963, Kennedy and Khrushchev signed the Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. It banned nuclear weapons tests in the atmosphere, underwater, and in outer space. The document was ratified by both governments. The last high-altitude nuclear test happened November 1st, 1962. Both nations conducted final blasts on the same day. Then it stopped. Space has been nuclear bomb-free for over 60 years now. The treaty worked. What it means today. Starfish Prime matters because it shows what we didn't know. Scientists thought they understood high-altitude nuclear explosions. They ran calculations, built models, and predicted minimal effects on Hawaii because of the distance. Every prediction was wrong. The electromagnetic pulse was far larger than expected. The radiation belt lasted far longer than predicted, and the satellite damage was far worse than calculated. The best minds of 1962 had no idea what would really happen when they nuked space. Today, everything depends on satellites and electronics, GPS navigation, phone networks, internet infrastructure, financial systems, power grids controlled by computer, military communications. Modern civilization is vastly more vulnerable to electromagnetic pulses than 1962 Hawaii was. A Starfish Prime level blast over North America would cause catastrophic damage. The pulse would be stronger because of Earth's magnetic field orientation at higher latitudes. The effects would be worse because modern electronics are more sensitive. Defense analysts have studied this extensively, and the calculations are terrifying. A single high-altitude nuclear detonation could disable infrastructure across an entire continent. The lesson we keep forgetting. Starfish Prime proved something important. When you detonate a hydrogen bomb in a complex system, you don't fully understand. You get results you can't predict. The scientists were smart. The calculations were sophisticated. The models used the best physics available in 1962, and they were catastrophically wrong about what would actually happen. We're militarizing space again. The Space Force exists. Multiple nations have anti-satellite weapons. China, Russia, and the United States all have systems designed to destroy space assets. The technology is more advanced than 1962, but the thinking is the same. The difference is we now know what one high-altitude nuclear test did to orbital space. We know it created a radiation belt that killed satellites for years. We know the electromagnetic effects were far worse than predicted. We know how much we didn't know. And we're building weapons anyway. Somewhere in classified archives are the full technical reports on Starfish Prime. Some data remains restricted 60 years later. The EMP waveforms from the later Fishbowl tests are still classified. The military learned things they're not sharing. That should worry everyone. Because the lesson of Starfish Prime is clear. When you weaponize something as complex as orbital space, you don't get to control what happens next. You just get to watch the radiation belts form, and the satellites die, and the infrastructure fail. And if you're lucky, someone wrote down good notes about why everything went wrong. The artificial belt that lingered. The Starfish Prime radiation belt contained high-energy electrons and beta particles. These particles followed Earth's magnetic field lines. They formed a torus, a donut-shaped zone of intense radiation circling the planet. The belt was far more intense than natural radiation belts. It damaged satellite electronics through cumulative exposure. Solar panels degraded faster. Computer chips failed. Communication systems stopped working. Scientists tracked the belt using a radioactive tracer called cadmium-109. The explosion produced this isotope as a byproduct. Following its distribution in the upper atmosphere, taught researchers about air currents and weather patterns at extreme altitudes. That's the strange duality of Starfish Prime. It was a weapons test that destroyed satellites while simultaneously producing valuable scientific data about atmospheric physics. The same explosion that created orbital hazards also advanced our understanding of Earth's magnetic field and upper atmosphere dynamics. The radiation gradually dispersed over years. Some sources say 5 years, others say 10. The records vary because different satellites were affected differently based on their orbits. Low-orbit satellites pass through the belt more often. High-orbit satellites sometimes avoided it entirely. By the early 1970s, the Starfish Prime belt had dissipated enough that it no longer posed a major threat to new satellites. But the damage was done. 8 satellites destroyed. Countless experiments contaminated. A decade of orbital operations complicated by artificial radiation. What we still don't know. Some Starfish Prime data remains classified. The EMP waveforms from Bluegill Triple Prime and Kingfish have never been publicly released. The military measured them and developed a theory that explained the generation of high-altitude electromagnetic pulses. Los Alamos physicist Conrad Longmire created the model in 1963. That theory is still used today, but the specific measurements remain restricted. We know they made observations. We know they confirmed the theory. We don't know the exact numbers. Documents about satellite damage have been partially declassified. The Defense Threat Reduction Agency released a 2010 report analyzing the effects on satellites, but portions remain redacted. We know at least 8 satellites were damaged or destroyed. The full list is classified. The health effects from radioactive contamination remain disputed. Some studies suggest the artificial radiation belt caused between 10,000 and 100,000 cancer cases over the following decades. Other studies find no elevated cancer rates. The data is incomplete because 1962 epidemiology wasn't sophisticated enough to track long-term low-level radiation exposure. We know the radiation belt lasted years. We know it was stronger than expected. We know it killed satellites. We don't know the full human cost. That's typical for nuclear weapons programs. The science gets published eventually, and the health impacts remain statistical arguments forever. The legacy in orbit. Starfish Prime changed how we think about space. Before July 9th, 1962, orbital space seemed unlimited and resilient. After Starfish Prime, we understood that human actions could make parts of space unusable. The artificial radiation belt proved that space could be contaminated, that orbits could become hazardous, that our activities had lasting consequences beyond Earth's atmosphere. That realization helped shape space policy. The Outer Space Treaty of 1967, built on the Limited Test Ban Treaty. It established that space belongs to all humanity. Nations can't claim territory in space. They can't place weapons of mass destruction in orbit. The treaties aren't perfect. Nations still develop anti-satellite weapons. Space debris is an ongoing problem. But we haven't detonated another nuclear weapon in space since 1962. Starfish Prime demonstrated that space warfare has unpredictable consequences. The artificial radiation belt didn't discriminate by nationality. It damaged Soviet satellites and American satellites equally. It created a hazard that affected every nation with space assets. That accidental equality, that unintended demonstration that space weapons harm everyone, including the nation that deploys them, may be Starfish Prime's most important legacy. We nuked space once. We broke it badly enough that we haven't tried again. The verdict. The Starfish Prime test proved that high-altitude nuclear explosions produce effects far beyond what physicists in 1962 understood. Modern simulations can recreate what happened. Modern infrastructure is far more vulnerable. A Starfish Prime level blast today would disable electronics across a continent. The Limited Nuclear Test Ban Treaty signed in 1963 banned nuclear weapons test in space. The treaty remains in effect. Space has been nuclear bomb-free for over 60 years. The lesson endures. When you weaponize complex systems you don't fully understand, you get catastrophic results you can't predict. And the people watching from hotel rooftops don't realize they're witnessing their own infrastructure getting destroyed until the streetlights go dark and the phones stop working. That's the most frightening part. Not the science, not the weapon, the casual normalization, the rainbow bomb parties, the tourists complaining about slow drink service while a thermonuclear aurora lights up the sky. We threw parties to watch a hydrogen bomb test. We brought our kids. We treated nuclear weapons like fireworks. That's 1962 America. That's Cold War thinking. That's how close we came to destroying orbital space permanently. The next time someone talks about weaponizing space, remember Starfish Prime. Remember the satellites that died. Remember the radiation belt that lasted a decade. Remember the scientists who were wrong about everything they predicted. And remember the hotel rooftops in Honolulu, where people cheered while their infrastructure failed. That's the real horror, not what the bomb did, what we thought was acceptable while we watched it happen. And there it is. Another documented descent into the declassified, filed properly, stamped accordingly, and revealed at last. I'm Nathaniel Shepard. your host on behalf of author Daniel P. Douglas. Be sure to check out Daniel's Substack, The Intelligence Bulletin from author Daniel P. Douglas, for other podcast series, written articles, and links to all of his books. Thank you for listening.